The night my friend set me up on a blind date, one guy at the table made a joke about the woman sitting across from me, and within 20 minutes, that same guy had to leave the restaurant because he could not stop crying. I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I am not a cruel person. I have never gone out of my way to humiliate anyone in my life. But that night, I said 11 words to a man I had known for years, and those 11 words took him apart in front of everyone. My name is Marcus Belaney, I'm 32, and up until that night I thought I understood what it meant to be kind. I thought kindness was mostly about not saying the mean thing out loud. I learned that night that kindness sometimes means saying the true thing out loud, even when it costs you a friendship. Let me back up. I had been single for almost 2 years. Not because I wanted to be, just because dating in your 30s feels less like romance and more like running a small, exhausting business with terrible reviews. My last relationship ended the way most quiet ones do. No cheating, no big blow-up, just two people who slowly stopped reaching for each other until one day neither of us bothered reaching at all. She moved out on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had to go to work the next morning like nothing had happened, and somehow that felt worse than the breakup itself. After that, my friends did what friends do. They worried about me in that loud, public way where the worry is mostly about them, not you. My buddy Connor kept telling me I needed to get back in the game, which is a phrase I have never once heard from a person who was actually happy. My coworker set me up with her cousin, who spent the entire date talking about her ex-boyfriend's truck. Another friend tried to get me on an app, and within a week I had matched with someone who turned out to be a fitness influencer trying to sell me protein powder. I was tired, not sad exactly, just tired in that specific way where you start to wonder if you're the problem, even though you can't point to anything you've actually done wrong. Then my friend Tyler called me on a Thursday night. Hey, he said, you free Saturday? Depends what for. Dinner, me, Jess, a couple other people, nothing weird. I want you to understand something. In the history of the English language, no sentence has ever been followed by something weird more reliably than the words, nothing weird. It's basically a guarantee. It's like when a mechanic says it's probably nothing, and then your car catches fire in the driveway. I should have known I didn't. Sure, I said, what time? 7, that new place downtown, the one with the exposed brick and the menu that takes itself way too seriously. The one where a baked potato costs $18. That's the one. Fine, I'll be there. I hung up and didn't think about it again until Saturday evening, when I was standing in front of my closet trying to figure out what a single, mildly exhausted 32-year-old man wears to a nothing weird dinner. I went with a button-down and jeans because that outfit says I tried, but not so hard that anyone could accuse me of trying. The restaurant was exactly what Tyler described. Dim lighting, the kind that's designed to make food look more expensive than it tastes. A menu with words like deconstructed and foam on it. The kind of place where the bread basket alone probably cost more than my first car. I walked in, gave my name, and the host pointed me toward a long table near the back. I could see Tyler first, then Jess, then a couple of other people I half recognized from various group hangouts over the years. And then I saw the empty chair. And the woman sitting beside it. I want to take a second here because this is the part where, if this were a different kind of story, I'd describe her in some dramatic, sweeping way. But that's not what happened. What happened is I saw her and my first thought was just, oh. Not oh like disappointment, oh like recognition, like my body understood something half a second before my brain caught up. She had dark hair pulled over one shoulder, a green dress, and she was looking down at the table, turning a water glass slowly in one hand like she was waiting for something unpleasant to happen and had already accepted it. She was a bigger woman, broad-shouldered, soft in the way some people are soft, and she had the kind of face that looked like it smiled a lot when it wasn't busy bracing for impact. And before I even said a word, before anyone introduced us, I understood exactly what this dinner was. Because I saw the way the table was looking at both of us, that specific look people get when they think they're about to witness something. Jess was sitting up a little too straight. One of the guys I didn't know well, I'd later learn his name was Connor's friend Derek, had this little smirk on his face like he'd bought a ticket to a show, and Tyler stood up way too fast. Marcus, hey man, perfect timing. Hey, I said slowly, looking at the empty chair, then at the woman beside it, who had looked up at the sound of my name and was now watching me with an expression I recognized immediately, because I'd worn that exact expression myself more times than I wanted to admit. It was the expression of someone bracing to be disappointed in a stranger. "This is Sophie," Tyler said, gesturing between us like he was presenting a prize on a game show. "Sophie, this is Marcus. Marcus, Sophie." "Hi," Sophie said, polite, careful, the kind of hi you give when you're testing the temperature of a room before deciding whether to stay in it. "Hi," I said back. And then Tyler, God bless him, but also Tyler added, "We figured you two might really get along." The table went quiet in that loaded way, not silent, just quiet, the kind of quiet where everyone's still talking but underneath it they're all listening for something else. I looked at the empty chair next to Sophie. I looked at Tyler, who had the expression of a man who had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. I looked at Sophie, who had gone very still, the way people go still when they're trying not to take up space. And I pulled out the chair and sat down. "Good," I said, loud enough for the table to hear, because I was starting to think I was the only person here who didn't already know the ending to all of Derek's stories. Derek blinked, a couple of people laughed, actual laughter surprised out of them. Sophie looked at me, really looked like she was trying to figure out if I was for real or just performing. "For the record," she said carefully, "I was also told this was a casual dinner with friends." "Huh," I said, so we were both lied to, strong foundation. That got her just a flicker, the corner of her mouth twitching before she could stop it, and something in my chest loosened just slightly, like I'd been holding a breath I didn't know about. For the first 15 or 20 minutes, the table tried to act normal and mostly failed. Conversations kept drifting toward me and Sophie and then away again, like everyone was checking on a pot to see if it had started boiling yet. Sophie handled it better than I would have. She answered questions about her work. She managed the back office for a veterinary clinic, which apparently involved a surprising amount of crisis management. And she had this dry, understated way of telling stories that made you lean in instead of away. She told us about a dog that had eaten an entire box of crayons and came out of it, quote, more colorful on the way out than the way in. She told us about a client who insisted his cat was depressed because Mercury was in retrograde, and how she'd had to nod along for 20 minutes while writing "anxious cat, recommend vet visit" on the chart. I found myself actually laughing, not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that catches you off guard. And then Connor opened his mouth. Now, Connor and I had known each other for years. We weren't close exactly, more like guys who ended up in the same group because of other people. He wasn't a bad guy most of the time. But Connor had a habit, one of those habits some men have where they think being blunt is the same thing as being funny. He'd had 2 drinks, maybe 3, and he leaned back in his chair, looked between me and Sophie with this grin on his face and said, "So Marcus, be honest, is this your usual type?" The way he said it, the little pause before type, the way his eyes flicked down and then back up, there was no mistaking what he meant. Everyone at that table knew exactly what he meant. He meant, "She's bigger than the women you normally date, and isn't that funny?" The table went dead silent, actually silent this time. I heard the clink of someone's fork against a plate and then nothing. I looked at Sophie, and here's the thing, she didn't flinch, not exactly, but I saw her hand tighten around her fork. I saw her jaw set in that particular way people set their jaws when they've had to do this exact thing, this exact bracing, more times than anyone should ever have to. Like she was getting ready to laugh it off before anyone could see that it landed. I felt something go very still and very clear inside me, not anger exactly, or yes, anger, but a calm kind, the kind that doesn't make you raise your voice, the kind that makes everything slow down. I put my fork down, I looked at Connor, and I said, "Say that again, and you'll be eating dinner alone." That's it, 11 words. I counted them later, lying in bed, trying to figure out why they'd landed the way they did. Say that again, and you'll be eating dinner alone. 11 words, and I didn't even raise my voice to say them. But something about the way I said it, flat, quiet, completely without performance, made the whole table go even more still than it already was. Connor's grin froze halfway through, like someone had paused a video. He started. "I'm not joking," I said, still quiet, "and I'm not interested in pretending I am to make this easier for you. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever sat in. And then, and this is the part that still gets me, even now, Connor's face just sort of fell apart. Not in an angry way, in a horrified way. Like he was watching in real time, a replay of what he'd just said, hearing it the way the rest of us had heard it, and realizing exactly how it had sounded and exactly who he'd said it in front of. His eyes went glassy almost immediately. He looked down at the table and I watched his jaw working, and then he stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor, and he said in this thick, wrecked voice, I need a minute, and he walked toward the bathroom with his hand already up over his face. Jess's mouth was hanging open. Tyler looked like he wanted the floor to open up and take him somewhere else. Derek was staring at his plate like it had personally betrayed him. And Sophie was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. Not quite shock, something underneath shock, like she'd been braced for one kind of night and gotten a completely different one and hadn't figured out yet what to do with the difference. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, once the table had started awkwardly to talk again about something else. I know, I said. He's probably crying in the bathroom right now. Probably. Doesn't that bother you? I thought about it for a second, a little, I admitted, but not as much as it would have bothered me to just sit here and let it happen. Sophie looked at me for a long moment, and then, quietly, almost like she didn't want anyone else to hear it, she said, Thank you. You don't have to thank me for that. I know I don't have to, she said, but I'm going to anyway because most people don't. I didn't have an answer for that, so I picked my fork back up, and after a second so did she, and for the next 20 minutes the table did that thing tables do after something uncomfortable happens. Everyone talked a little too brightly about nothing, the weather, a movie someone had seen, anything that wasn't what had just happened 3 feet away. Connor came back from the bathroom about 10 minutes later, eyes red, and mumbled something about not feeling well and left without really saying goodbye to anyone. Nobody stopped him. I think on some level everyone at that table understood that he needed to leave more than he needed an apology accepted. After Connor left, something in the air changed, not in a bad way. In a way like a window had been opened in a room that had been stuffy for a long time. Sophie relaxed just slightly, her shoulders dropped, her voice got a little easier, and the conversation between us stopped being something performed for the table and started being something just for us. She asked me what I did. I told her I worked in logistics for a regional shipping company, which sounds boring until you start telling stories about it, because apparently nothing in this world goes according to plan ever, and my entire job is just a series of small disasters with deadlines attached. She told me she'd grown up 2 towns over, that she'd wanted to be a marine biologist until she realized that marine biology mostly involves paperwork and grant applications, not whales, and that she'd ended up in veterinary administration, completely by accident, like most good things in my life. Most good things, I asked. Most of them, she said. The bad things I plan very carefully. The good things just sort of happen to me while I'm not looking. Is tonight a good thing or a bad thing? She considered that, tilting her head slightly like she was actually weighing it. Jury's still out, she said. Ask me again at the end of the night. By the time dessert came around, something with a name longer than the actual dish, I'd more or less forgotten the rest of the table existed. Jess kept giving me these little sideways looks like she was trying to read something in my face, and at one point she leaned over and said, a little too brightly, You two seem like you're really hitting it off. Sophie looked at her. Was that not the plan? Jess's smile flickered. I mean, no, of course, You just seem surprised, I said, not unkindly, just stating it. Jess didn't have an answer for that either. I held her gaze for a second, not angry, just steady, and she looked away first and found something very interesting in her water glass. Sophie noticed, of course she noticed. She seemed to notice everything. When the check came, there was that familiar chaos, people pulling out cards, arguing quietly over splitting things, Tyler doing math out loud and getting it wrong twice. Sophie reached for her purse and I said, I've got it, and she looked at me with one eyebrow raised. You don't have to do that. I know, I said, I'm doing it anyway, because most people don't. She laughed, actually laughed, surprised out of her, and something about hearing her own words handed back to her seemed to land somewhere soft, because her whole face changed for a second, opened up in a way it hadn't all night. Fine, she said, but I'm getting the next one. The next one. If there is one, she said, and then looked like she immediately regretted saying it, like she'd given something away she hadn't meant to. I didn't push, I just said noted and left it there and watched her relax again. Outside, the night had gone cool, the kind of cool that feels good after a stuffy restaurant. People were splitting off in different directions, saying their goodbyes, and Sophie stepped a little away from the group, toward the curb, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. I followed, not in a dramatic way, just there, standing near her. "You okay?" I asked. She let out a breath, looking up at the streetlights. "I knew within about 30 seconds what tonight was supposed to be," she said. "Jess kept doing this thing with her eyebrows, and Derek had this look like he was settling in for a show. I saw that too." "I almost left before you even sat down," she admitted. "I had my coat halfway on." "Why didn't you?" She looked at me then, really looked, the way she had at the very start of the night, except this time there wasn't anything careful in it. "Because you sat down like you didn't already know what kind of night this was supposed to be," she said. And for about 30 seconds, I let myself hope I was wrong about that. "You weren't wrong about what it was supposed to be," I said. "You were wrong about how it was going to go." That got a small, real smile out of her, small but real, the kind that takes a second to fully arrive. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Did you mean what you said to Connor, or was that, I don't know, a performance for the table?" I thought about that question more seriously than maybe any question I'd been asked in a long time. "No," I said finally. "It wasn't for the table. I didn't even think about the table. I paused, trying to find the right words. "I looked at you, and I saw you brace yourself for something you've probably had to brace for 100 times before, and something about that made me really, really angry. Not loud angry, just," I shook my head. "I don't really have a better word for it than angry." Sophie didn't say anything for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "You're right that I've had to brace for it before," she said. "More times than I can count. And usually when someone defends me, it's this big production, like they need me to know how generous they're being. Like I'm supposed to be grateful. I don't need you to be grateful." "I know," she said. "That's what made it different." We stood there for a second, the streetlights humming above us, the sound of traffic somewhere a few blocks over. "So," I said, "good or bad?" "What?" "The night jury's verdict." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "Ask me again, but not tonight." "Not tonight." "Tonight is contaminated," she said, echoing, I'd learn later, something she'd thought about a lot. "I don't want whatever this is to be something that started because a room full of people tried to embarrass me and you happen to be decent about it. I want to know what it's like when nobody's watching, when there's no audience and no Connor and no Jess doing the eyebrow thing." "That's fair," I said, and it was more than fair. "So," she said, pulling her phone out of her bag, "if you want to actually do this, not tonight, but actually, I think you should ask me properly, like a person, not like someone making a save." I looked at her for a second, and then I said, "Okay, Sophie, can I take you to dinner sometime? Just us, no audience, nothing to prove." She smiled, slow, like she was giving herself permission to enjoy it. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." We exchanged numbers right there on the sidewalk, the cold making both our hands a little clumsy with our phones, and then a car pulled up her ride and she got in, and through the window, just before it pulled away, she gave me this little wave, almost shy, completely different from the careful, braced version of her I'd met 2 hours earlier. I stood on that sidewalk for a long minute after the car disappeared, not really thinking about anything, just feeling like the night had turned into something I hadn't expected it to be when I walked in. I texted Tyler the next morning, just one line, "Don't ever do that again, but thank you." He wrote back, "I had no idea Connor was going to say that, I swear." I know I wrote, "That's actually worse." He didn't have a response for that, and honestly, neither did I need one. Our first real date happened 5 days later at a used bookstore on the east side of town, her suggestion, not mine. "If you take me somewhere boring," she'd said over text, "I'm going to assume you peaked in high school and lost interest in life sometime around graduation." "That's a lot of pressure for a Tuesday," I texted back. "Those are my standards, take them or leave them." I took them. The bookstore was one of those places that smells like old paper and slightly burnt coffee, with shelves that went up higher than they had any right to and a cat that clearly ran the place and tolerated the humans as staff. Sophie was waiting near the front when I got there, wearing jeans and an oversized green sweater, hair down, looking completely different from the version of her I'd met at the restaurant, not because she looked worse or better, just because she looked like herself, unguarded, like someone who'd shown up to a place she actually wanted to be. "Before we start," she said, "I need to tell you something important." "Okay." "I judge people based on which section they go to first." "That's terrifying." "It's accurate," she said, "high stakes, no pressure." We spent almost 2 hours in that store, 2 hours. She pulled books off shelves and told me which covers were lying to me. "This one looks like a thriller. It is actually 400 pages about a man's relationship with his lawn," and I found the staff recommendations shelf and read her the most dramatically overwritten one out loud until she was laughing too hard to breathe. She made me pick a book of poetry. I made her pick a cookbook. Neither of us bought either one, which felt somehow like exactly the point. Afterward, we ended up at a little cafe 2 doors down, the kind with mismatched mugs and a window seat that made you feel like you were allowed to be slow for once. Halfway through her coffee, Sophie set the mug down and looked at me with an expression that told me something was coming. "Can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer, not a nice one." "Okay." "Did what happened at the dinner change how you see me?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have an answer, because I wanted to make sure I gave her the right one, not just the fast one. "Yes," I said finally. Something flickered across her face, not quite hurt, more like she was steeling herself for the rest of the sentence. "It made me see you more clearly," I said, before that stealing could turn into something worse. "I already thought you were, I don't know, interesting, funny, all of that, from the second you opened your mouth at that table. But watching you brace for that comment and then watching you not let it define the rest of the night, that's not nothing. That told me something about you that 20 good first impressions wouldn't have." She looked down at her coffee. "I'm used to people thinking that defending me is the whole event," she said quietly. "Like I should be so grateful that someone treated me like a person that the gratitude becomes the relationship." "I don't want your gratitude," I said. "I want to know what book you'd never admit to liking." That surprised a laugh out of her, real, sudden, the kind that catches in your throat. "That's a deeply unfair question." "I noticed you didn't say no." "There's a romance novel," she admitted, lowering her voice like she was confessing a crime, "with a dragon on the cover. I've read it 4 times. See, now that is the kind of thing I actually want to know about you." She was still smiling when she looked up, and something about the way she was looking at me made my chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. The second date turned into a third, and the third turned into something that stopped having clean edges, the kind of thing where you stop counting dates because it just becomes the shape of your week. We went to a tiny Italian place where the waiter kept bringing extra bread without being asked, and Sophie spent half the meal doodling on a napkin little cartoon animals with enormous, unimpressed expressions, while telling me about a dog at the clinic who had bitten 3 vets and then fallen asleep in her lap the same afternoon. "Why you?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I just don't give off I'm about to do something to you energy. Lobar. You'd be amazed how many people fail it." After dinner, we walked for almost an hour with no real destination, just talking, and at some point, I didn't even notice it happening, she took my hand. Not a big gesture. Just her fingers slipping into mine like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I liked that it wasn't a question. I liked that she didn't look at me first to see if it was okay. It was just a decision, hers. About 3 weeks in, she invited me up to her apartment for the first time. "Fair warning," she said, unlocking the door. "My plant collection suggests I'm a much calmer person than I actually am. Don't be fooled." Her apartment was small and warm and full of things that made sense once you knew her. A shelf of paperbacks organized by color instead of author, which she defended fiercely. A corkboard covered in photos of dogs and cats from the clinic, each one labeled with a tiny joke. A blanket on the couch that she immediately wrapped herself in like she'd been waiting all day to do exactly that. She made tea chamomile for herself, something with ginger for me, because you mentioned once that your stomach hates you, and I remembered, and we sat on the couch with our knees touching, not talking about anything in particular. And then out of nowhere, she got quiet in a different way. "Can I tell you something?" she said, "and I need you to just let me say it without doing anything about it." "Okay." She wrapped both hands around her mug. The thing about that night, she said slowly, isn't really about Connor. Connor's a guy who said an obvious thing out loud at a dinner table. That happens. It's happened before, it'll happen again, probably from someone worse than him. She paused. The thing that actually gets to me, she continued, is what happens after. When someone steps in like you did, and it's wonderful, genuinely, but then for the rest of the night, sometimes for weeks, I become the thing that happened. People treat me like I'm fragile because of what someone else said about me, like the cruelty is the headline and I'm just the footnote it happened to. I didn't say anything, I just listened the way she'd asked me to. And I keep waiting for that to happen with you, she said. I keep waiting for you to start being careful with me, gentle in that way that's actually about you, not me, and it hasn't happened. And I don't. She stopped, laughed a little, shook her head. I don't really know what to do with that. I think I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for 3 weeks. Has it dropped? No, she said, that's what I'm telling you. I set my mug down. For what it's worth, I said, I haven't been thinking of you as someone who needs to be handled carefully. I've been thinking of you as someone who makes terrible road trip noises when she's annoyed and judges people by which bookstore section they walk to first and has apparently read a dragon romance novel 4 times. 3.5, she muttered. I gave up partway through the 4th time because I got mad at a side character. See that, I said, that's the version of you I've been spending time with, not the version from that dinner. That version was just one bad 20 minutes, it's not the whole story. Sophie didn't say anything for a moment. When she looked at me again, her eyes were a little too bright, but she was smiling. That, she said quietly, is dangerously close to the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. I'll try to be less dangerous in the future. Don't, she said, I take it back, stay dangerous. And then she kissed me, not a big, dramatic thing, just quiet and certain, like something that had been building for weeks and had finally found the moment it was waiting for. I'd love to tell you that was the end of the hard part. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I brought Sophie to a work thing, a low-key after-hours get-together with people from my office, the kind of event where everyone pretends it's not mandatory even though it absolutely is. I introduced her around and most people were great, genuinely great. But there was this one guy, Brendan, from a different department, who I barely knew, and at one point, when Sophie had stepped away to the restroom, he leaned toward me with this look on his face and said, low enough that he probably thought it was private, wow, didn't expect that. Good for you, man, I guess. Confidence is attractive, right? I felt that familiar stillness settle into my chest again, the same one from the dinner. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, quiet, flat, the same tone. Brendan must have heard something in it because his grin faltered slightly. Nothing, just, different from your usual type, that's all, didn't mean anything by it. You said it like it was a compliment, I said, to me, like I'd done something impressive by dating someone you've decided isn't supposed to be with someone like me. I didn't mean. I know what you meant, I said, and I'd really appreciate it if, going forward, you didn't say things like that about her, or to me, or near either of us at all, ever. Brendan went red, mumbled something about getting another drink and disappeared into the crowd. When Sophie came back, she could tell something had happened. She always could, but she didn't ask, not right away. It was only later in the car that she said, something happened with that guy, Brendan. Yeah. You don't have to tell me. I know, but I will anyway, and I told her all of it, exactly what he'd said, exactly what I'd said back. She was quiet for a second, then she said, eventually this is going to happen again, and again, people are always going to have something to say. I know. Doesn't that get exhausting, for you, having to be that every time? I thought about it, really thought about it, before I answered. Honestly, I said, it's a lot less exhausting than it would be to just sit there and let it happen. I tried that version of myself for about 30 seconds at that dinner before I said anything, and it felt worse than anything Connor could have said. Sophie reached over and put her hand on my knee, not saying anything, just leaving it there for the rest of the drive. Things between us kept growing the way good things grow, quietly, in the spaces between the big moments. She met my parents at a barbecue, and my mom pulled me aside afterward and said, she corrected your dad's barbecue technique, and he listened to her. Marcus, do you understand what that means? Nobody listens to your father. I met her two best friends from college who interrogated me for 45 minutes about my intentions while pretending it was a casual brunch, and apparently I passed because afterward one of them texted Sophie, "Okay, he can stay." About 8 months in, we started talking about moving in together, not as some big decision, more as an observation that we were basically already doing it, just badly, with 2 separate apartments and a lot of unnecessary driving. We found a place with good light and a kitchen big enough for both of us to be in it at the same time without elbowing each other, which, if you've ever lived with someone you know is a genuinely important real estate criterion. The day we moved in, we ordered too much pizza and sat on the floor because the couch hadn't arrived yet, surrounded by boxes, and Sophie looked around at the mess of it and said, "This is the first place I've ever lived that didn't feel like I was just renting space until something better came along. Even with all these boxes." "Especially with all these boxes," she said. "Boxes mean you're staying." A year after that, almost exactly a year actually, which I promise was not planned, I'm just historically bad at planning things, I proposed. Not at some big event, not in front of anyone. We were at that same bookstore, the one from our first date, the cat older and grumpier but still very much in charge, and Sophie was holding a book she had absolutely no intention of buying, reading the back cover with the particular focus she gets when she's deciding whether a cover is lying to her. I didn't make a speech, I just said her name, and when she turned around I was holding the ring and I said, "I don't ever want you to have to brace for anything again, not with me, not ever." She didn't say yes right away. She put the book down first, carefully, like even in that moment she was thinking about whether someone else might want to read it, and then she said yes, and then she laughed, and then she cried a little, and the cat watched the whole thing from the top of a shelf with what I can only describe as profound disinterest. We got married the following spring. Connor wasn't invited, we'd lost touch after that night, and honestly that felt right for both of us. But Tyler came and Jess came, and at one point during the reception Jess pulled Sophie aside, and I watched from across the room as they talked for a few minutes, and afterwards Sophie told me Jess had apologized, really apologized, not the deflecting kind, for that whole setup, for the eyebrows, for all of it. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told her it worked out," Sophie said, which, annoyingly, means she gets to feel like she did something right. "Did she?" Sophie thought about it. "No," she said, "but you did, and honestly that's the part that matters." These days, when people ask how we met, I tell them the short version. We were set up on a blind date by mutual friends. And then, if they push for more, I tell them the rest, about Connor, about the 11 words, about the bookstore and the dragon romance novel and the cartoon animals on napkins. And almost every time, the person listening gets this look on their face, somewhere between surprised and moved, like they weren't expecting the story to go the way it went. And I think that's the part that stays with me most, even now. Not the moment at the dinner table, even though that's the moment everyone wants to hear about. It's everything that came after, all the ordinary, quiet, unremarkable days where nothing dramatic happened at all, where nobody needed defending, where it was just two people who liked being around each other, building something slow and real out of bookstores and bad coffee and cartoon frogs on napkins. Because here's the thing I didn't understand before that night, and maybe you don't either, and that's okay. Defending someone isn't the relationship, it's not even close to the relationship. It's just the moment where you find out what someone's actually like underneath the version of themselves the world keeps trying to make them perform. The relationship is everything that happens after, when nobody's watching, when there's no audience, when it's just the two of you deciding, again and again, on perfectly ordinary days, that you want to keep choosing each other. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been the person at the table who said something, or didn't say something, and realized afterward exactly what kind of person that made you? And on the other side of it, has anyone ever surprised you by being decent when you were braced for the opposite? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if this one hit for you, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you in the next one.